How's it going, guys? How's your Saturday morning?
Good, good. Getting to spend it with my cousins, sisters.
And of all the things we could be discussing after we coming on call after almost, I think, months, basically, we're discussing third culture kids today.
Yeah.
And Richa, would you want to take us through what that is? If you had to explain to someone who has never heard of the concept, probably someone who's like a 10-year-old, what is a third culture kid according to you?
So a third culture kid is somebody who is brought up, who spends their formative years in a country that isn't their own. So effectively, it's an expatriate child.
Okay. And how do you fit into that? What about you and your upbringing makes you a third culture kid?
So I'm Indian. My parents are Indian, but the first country I lived in was Hong Kong, and we lived for nearly 5 years before we moved to Malaysia, and we stayed there for nearly 13 years. Then I moved to Singapore for about 6 months, just to really mess with my culture. Uh, and then I studied in Scotland, and then I moved back to India eventually. And now I live in Chicago, and I know that formative years probably stop around 18, but frankly, I mean, it's all been very confusing.
Understandably.
So that's why.
And I'm going to ask the loaded question after all of that, that in all of those cultures and the fact that, your parents are from a different culture and you technically are from multiple, if you had to pick one, what would be home, or do you even have one, or what is it like?
Do you even have a home? No, I know. I
One,
know.
or an
Honestly,
amalgamation.
honestly, the reason I reacted like that is because I was trying to think. I hate that question. Like it comes up every now and again, and like that is the dreaded question. Exactly like you said, it's a hard question, and
Yeah.
I'm not alone. I think other
Mm-hmm.
kids who might watch this and stuff would probably have cringed as well because that is the question that haunts you at dinner parties and cocktail events and at work and when people are just trying to make small talk and they say things like I detect an accent and you're like oh ha 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 how can I escape this conversation. um I have no idea. That's a very difficult question for me. I mean, sometimes I pick one just because I don't want to be in the conversation anymore. So I'm just kind of like, roulette, and I'll just say India or Malaysia, Hong Kong, or I sometimes I say the Far East, just keep it vague. Um, but for the most part, I mean, I stumble around a little bit depending on the event or who's asking.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
no.
So then a little bit on that. Um, when did you first find out about something like as a third country, and like how did you come across the term, and then what's your journey or identity being post that?
So I think I came across the term on a LinkedIn blog or something like that, and I think someone had written like an essay about third culture kids and what that means. And I remember definitely, feeling a little shocked that there was actually a term for us. And actually was really confusing that term because I don't know why it's this third in it, because surely it should be second culture. But it did actually make me feel good in a way. Like on one hand, there is kind of a I don't know, it's a bit weird to have that definition, but on the other hand, it's really nice to feel like I'm part of community. Like when
Mm-hmm.
kind of floating around being confused about identities alone. It's always nice, I think, as a human being in general to be pigeonholed. And so it was nice to kind of wrap myself in this delightful pigeonhole, along with the other people like me.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does actually make sense. So, just to kind of, build on that a little more, because Nishka and I were talking earlier, as military kids, and what you said, you sometimes just pick an answer because it's easier in the situation. But even then, if you have to really build on it, how would you say it's affected your personality or your behavior?
That's
Not having an answer for a question that for most people seems a very straightforward answer.
that's a very, very good question. I would say that it makes it generally when I have that discussion, I think again, depending on the situation, I use really bad. or I feel like really, really bad, or I feel I guess kind of privileged, if I'm very honest. I think that it depends on where how I've been feeling about the identity things for a long time because I think it's fluid. I don't think I generally am, at peace with it. I think that I go through phases where I'm kind of like, oh wow, I had such a lucky upbringing. I'm very privileged to have lived in different countries. Um, and then sometimes, like I look at my husband who grew up in one city his whole life, or you guys or other friends who have, who had more communal upbringings and stuff like that, or who speak the language of the country that they're from, or that thing. I mean, I know everyone has their identity, confusing identities in their own way, but I think
Mhm.
that that question, I think it sometimes makes me really, really sad.
Mm.
Yeah, to be honest. Like usually I think the other person can sometimes tell that I'm uncomfortable as well. Mostly because I say that I am. But sometimes yeah. Yeah.
So, I want to dig a little deeper into that aspect, right? So, this idea of a sense of belonging, like you rightly said, we all crave it in our own ways. We could grow up in very different circumstances, but if we have this unanswered question of where do I belong, it becomes especially hard as adults who are navigating the world. So, for you, your cultural identity and ethnic identities I are different, right? So
Mhm.
can you walk us through what they are like for you? Because for some of us, that question is very easy to answer. But what is that like for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think a good way to look at cultural and ethnic identities in my life is to kind of look at what the home life looked like when I was growing up and what the outside world looked like. So at home, when I walked through the door, it was like stepping into India to some degree, like an Indian expatriate household. There was like, I mean, at least when we were growing up, there's like a little puja area. There's Indian food. My mom used to yell at me in Bengali. Um, I used to, I mean, times like it wasn't like overtly so um in in general, but I think sometimes my mother had her own like cultural crises, and she would overcompensate and to do, I think, Indian things that maybe you guys wouldn't have even done growing up in India. Like she used to teach me like Bengali songs and stuff like that before I could.
Wow.
It's little things like that, and I knew, kind of mantras, and I used to do
Hmm.
those Diwali things, the
Rangoli?
Alpuna, yeah. No, not just
Yeah. Oh.
like the Bengali thing where you mix rice,
Oh, okay, okay,
you
okay.
make the footprints, like things like that. So she made sure that I had that cultural identity at home. So, but then when I go outside of the house, so it was an entirely different ball game. I went to international school, mostly in Malaysia, and most of the kids in my school were either other expatriate third culture kids, or they were the children of wealthy Malaysian Chinese people. So I think that itself had two aspects. Number one, everyone is either filthy rich or they're like me and they're equally confused. So our school was kind of this mishmash of cultures. The food I ate at school was mostly Malaysian. So even now, comfort food for me is like noodle soup and coconut rice things and stuff like that, fish balls. Um, and everyone spoke different languages. Our language options at school were like, there were many things that you could learn if you wanted to. People had to be very politically correct about the things they said to each other. The way we were taught was very
Hmm.
confusing because everyone had like different perspectives in class and brought their own perspectives to school and stuff. So I think culturally, um, marrying what was in my environment with what was at home was sometimes a bit difficult. Like you'd go to school and you'd feel out of place if you seemed too Indian, the same way that I had friends who'd feel out of place if they felt too French or too Iranian. So you all kind of had to dumb down your ethnicity, I think, a little bit in order to conform. And that is definitely something that I have continued to have to do as an adult because in order to conform even as an adult. So, for example, if I'm in a professional situation or when I was at university, there's a degree to which, I mean, that was a culture shock. I had never ever met people who weren't of that international school mindset, really. Like I'd never been around them for so long. So I ended up, I guess, trying to find things in common with British middle class kids who'd been brought up in the UK. And
Mm.
that added to my identity. Even when I moved to India, that kind of that to me was a whole new culture that I again had to assimilate in and try to conform to. And ironically, Indian culture in India was still different from Indian culture at home, because at this
Yeah.
my mother had become such an expatriate that I didn't even notice that there was a disconnect there. So basically, my house is a different universe, and the outside has always been a different universe. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's beautifully put.
Thank you. I've thought about this a lot.
So I want to touch upon exactly what you just said.
Okay.
How old were you when you moved to India?
22.
So at
22.
so at 22, you moved to India for the first time. Now, these universes you talk about, right? The universe at home, outside. So this universe at home, which was the Indian universe, which your mom had created for you, how did that clash with the universe that is India in terms of the food, the clothing, and what it means to be like culturally Indian, so to speak?
I think that, and I think some of this might sound familiar to you as two of the people who guided me through India
Mhm.
at different stages of my childhood when I visited, and for which thank you. Thank you for walking me across the road that one time, Malika, and going back across the road when you realized that I'd gotten stuck in the middle of the road because I was too afraid to cross the road. This is in front of Bangalore Central. I don't know if you remember. Um, it was really sweet of you. I'll never forget that, or the fear. I think that what my parents did was they kind of gave us a very idyllic version of Indian culture. So I think
Mm,
when we went to India, I was very much able to, I understood what people were talking about, culturally, but I think it was more theoretical for me. Um, and I think I had a very idyllic perception of what India was like. For instance, I think there was kind of, I think this is a good one. The concept of a good Indian girl, right, is very different from the concept of a real Indian girl. Um,
yes.
I think that that is something that Indian moms drill into their daughters from all over the world, including in India. But I think when you don't have the reference for a real Indian girl, you end up kind of assuming that Indian girls don't have sex. Indian girls study very hard. Indian girls don't ever do things like drink or drugs. And they're kind of like they sit around demurely wearing saris and that sort of thing. I mean, on the other hand, she also raised me to be a firecracker. So there's that perception as well, right? Like,
Mm,
the girl is tough and smart and gets what she wants and go gets and that sort of thing. So that was there as well. But I think that in general, I think that she I think that she wanted me to kind of be able to maybe one day go back and not feel so culturally shocked, ironically. So that was one aspect of it. So I think when I went to India and I met actual Indian humans,
mm,
very surprised to learn that I was a bit of a goody goody. And and frankly, no, it wasn't even just that I was a goody goody. It was that I was pretending to be a goody. In fact, I had done all sorts of raucous things in my teenage years and my university years. I was pretending that I was this kind of like, good girl to kind of like conform. So that's the weird one. Like that I
mm,
went into like my 20s because I was so confused. I think I think the other thing was, I think the other thing is it's different to kind of experience things like Holi in expatriate
mm,
cities and Holi in India. So I think that was something different, or even like Pujo I've actually attended like Bengali Association Pujo in Malaysia, and I think in Hong Kong once, but I've never actually done that in India because I think, like I said, my mother was more overtly Indian
Mm.
abroad, ironically. Trying to think of other examples of why it was weird to move to India, even though I'd lived at home as an Indian. Oh yes, it turns out not all Bengali girls know how to sing Rabindranath Tagore songs. So that was a bit of a culture shock too. No, but I'm very proud of that. I'm very impressed with my mother's gumption and with the effort that she took to try and make sure that I had that cultural connection. I mean, how on earth could she have prepared me for learning how to cross the road? Or that sort of thing. And I think that I have to take responsibility for that, right? Myself. Like I had the privilege of living in India for 4.5 years, and they were 4.5 of the best years of my life. And I feel like getting to do that meant that I finally could kind of click those worlds together myself.
Mm.
The most culturally important things I ever did in India was learning how to drive there, because I think that's learning how to speak another language. And you do have to kind of, be in a position where you can scream at auto drivers if you want to, or overtake them, or run them off the road, or all the lamp lights or all the street lights are off, and so you're just driving on the ring road at 2 o'clock in the morning after work, and you have no idea what's happening. That was liberating for me, because I really feel like I belonged in a country when that sort of thing happened. Sorry, that was maybe a very long-winded way of explaining all of that.
Not at all. So you spent 4 years in India. At the
Mhm.
end of those 4 years, did you feel a lot more Indian, quote unquote? And were you able to relate with your peers and colleagues and the friends that you made and felt like, oh, we are part of the same group, we are the same gang, versus when you actually landed in India and you realized that the Indians abroad versus the Indians in India are so different, that the good, the good Indian girl example that you gave. So
Oh
how did
yeah.
that change?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely felt more Indian. And I think what I realized actually was that the differences were in my head in a lot of ways. So I think that on some level, like from maybe I definitely felt more Indian. I think that ironically, I learned how to embrace the fact that I was brought up in a different country. So I think initially, because I was trying to conform, and I was trying to be this other person to seem more Indian, I think was, because I think I saw my third culture kiddism oddly as a little bit as like less than, because
Mm,
around me was in a different zone. Um, but I definitely think by the time I left, I mean, a couple of years in, even way before I left, I definitely felt like I kind of felt almost like there wasn't an Indian, if that makes sense. Like there didn't need to be like I don't know, delineation between the two. I was just me and my friends were just them. And they like it didn't matter, if that makes
mm.
like it wasn't like something lame like I had it in me all along. It's that you just I don't know, I just stopped thinking about it as much, I think. And I think I did learn to embrace the third culture thing, because I think, especially in the workplace, I genuinely felt kind of like people thought that I was a bit stuck up.
Mm.
Um, and it wasn't just at work, it was just in general. I think people just assume this sense of, you know, privilege or whatever. And I think that once again, I tried to dumb that down. And B, I felt almost guilty, even though it was them judging me. And then eventually I just embraced it, and I'd be like, yeah, so like, I don't know, like I just got really tired of kind of hiding it almost and trying to conform. Hmm. Yeah.
That's a great statement. I really like that. So I want to talk a little bit about the fact that your brother, Animesh,
Mhm.
when he became a citizen of the
Mhm.
UK, I remember we were talking and you told us that when that happened, you suddenly felt like this one person who understood your journey with identity suddenly had one.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
That was It was odd. A part of me was just no, overwhelmingly, I was just kind of like I felt like he'd made it. I felt like my brother had made it across the finish line, like he'd found somewhere. Does that make sense? Like it didn't matter where it was, but he had kind of done his soul searching. He'd put in the work and he decided this is where I want to be. This is where I feel like I'm from. And I was really proud of him, really happy for him. And it was kind of, I don't know, it was just brilliant to watch that happen. To kind of I had a conversation with him once where I was like, "Oh, so you're gonna settle down here, or is this just like a citizenship thing?" And he was like, "No, I feel British. I am British. This is who I am. I haven't known this kind of belonging, you know."
Mm,
And it was a very quiet conversation. You know how Dada and I tend not to have very serious conversations, but it was very nice to kind of hear that in his voice. On the other hand, I was watching him finish the marathon at a distance, you know,
mm,
and in a position where I didn't even know if I wanted to get into the marathon, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know that I necessarily want to settle down anywhere at some stage. I think I do, but I think because he's no longer in the marathon and I may or may not be there, I kind of felt like, yeah, like the only other person in the world who knew what it was like to grow up with my identity no longer had as much of the struggle as I had, or no longer was in the same place. I'm sure he has his own struggle.
mm,
I'm sure it's the same for you, right? Like you guys, moved around India a lot, right? And at the end of the day, if anyone knows what your childhood like, it's Malika. It's Malika, right? And same for you, Malika. It's not no one else in the world would. And it's actually why I feel really bad for people without siblings. But I genuinely it's so bad for them. but but I do think that like that that was interesting for me. I wouldn't say it was hard for me, but I would say it was definitely an oh, maybe I should start thinking about settling down. But
mm,
I mean, and it's funny. The funny thing is, like, just to go back to your first question, Malika, where do I belong and stuff like that? I have thought about this a lot, and I think it's actually people. It's people and stuff. Um,
mm,
Now when I am, to kind of marry the two questions, when I am thinking about my brother and what he's done and, how he's, settled down, and I do start thinking maybe I should do that. The first thing I think is, okay, where do I want to settle down? My brother. He's there, I should be there. In an ideal world, where do I want to die? Close to my brother? Yeah. So I think that that's kind of the way I think about it. Rather than a place, it's people and it's stuff. Yeah, relationships and stuff.
Do you ever wonder, thinking of the future, that if and when you have kids, what in your capacity is it going to take to create culture for them? What would be your version of culture for them? How would you want them to
That's
understand
a very
culture?
good question. Sorry, I have like a messaging thing and I wanted to turn it off. What would culture be to my children? Um, let's see. We all become our mothers, so I suspect that I'll be teaching them Rabinder Shangi. Or the Diwali thing, even though I'm not particularly religious. I think it's the cultural thing. So I definitely think that my children, I want them to have perhaps an even stronger sense of Indian identity, because I know how important that was for me in the end. I mean, so I did read the statistic earlier, and I'm going to read this out to you guys. 60% of third culture kids want to raise their children as third culture kids, and I think I fall within that bracket. Um, but I think that I want to do it in a way where they are still rooted. Like one of their cultures is India, so I'd want them to live in India for sure at some stage in their lives, and not for a short period of time, like maybe 4 years at least. I really want that. I want them to learn the language. I want them to learn how to cross the road. I want them to meet their extended family. I want them to, I know viewers may not know this, but our family is pretty scattered because it is a defense family. And there's so few of us as well. But Naruth, my husband, his family are very, very good. He's a huge family. They have like a communal household kind of area and stuff in Calcutta. I really want them to get into that. I really do. I want them to know Bengali. I want them to, go to the places that he went to. The food. I want him to know all that. I want them to know all their uncles and aunts, and I want them to get into family politics. I want them to hate their family. I want them to love their family. I want them to have all those experiences in India. I also want them to I also think though that there are privileges to being a third culture kid, and I want them to have those privileges too. So I want them to, know what it's like to go to international school in Argentina, or to live in Korea, to learn Japanese, maybe if they live in Tokyo. I want them to see the world as an open book, and I want them to feel like if I want to live there, I get to live there. There's no question about why wouldn't I be able to live there. And I think that is, again, that's a privilege that I think third culture kids have.
How do you think we can raise the bar as a global community of human beings? How do you think we can just be better?
Oh, as people, so not from a third culture kid, for a third culture kid perspective, not as it relates to third culture kids. Ooh, I think that's a good question. It's a really good question. I'm very glad that I understand it now. I think that that people could raise the bar by being more accepting of one another's differences when it comes to culture. I think that sometimes, I think that some may find this incredibly unattractive, but I think it's a good thing. And sorry to all of my other relatives, but I don't understand patriotism. I don't see the point of it. And I think that potentially is a good thing sometimes, because I think that I don't like the idea of political borders. It's why, for all of its, negative qualities, I like the EU. I like that people can just travel freely. I like that they have that kind of more globalized European mentality. I like SARC for the same reason. I like that I can go to Nepal if I want to, or I can go to, well, not right now, but I like that I can go to, other SARC countries without a passport if I want to. I think that is definitely something that people should think about. Why do we see us? Why do we have to identify with one country? Why is that a good thing? Why should I have a home? Why is it forget the privilege of it. Just what makes it better for us to have only one place that we're from? But does that not lead to kind of sometimes to more strife between people? Because, for instance, look at the world right now, right? This is American made, this is British made, this is Indian made. That's where has that gotten us? America first, Britain first, India first. No, that doesn't help anybody, and I think that leads to that false sense of exceptionalism. National exceptionalism is dangerous, because I think that can lead to nationalism. So I think that maybe looking at the world as a whole, as a kind of globalized community, while it has its flaws, I think that might be a good way to look at the world. And I'm not saying give up your culture, because I think culture is incredibly important. But I just think maybe opening your mind and opening up your definition of the word culture,
Right.
really, really helpful to people, because I think it makes you more appreciative of.
That's right.
But
That's food for thought for sure. It's going to make me think about it.
Yeah, manga. Sorry.
Richa, it was wonderful talking to you. And thank you for sharing so much about what it is to be a third culture kid, identity, belonging. It's been very interesting, and it's been very informative. And thank you for opening up. And I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you for having me. It was really cathartic, actually, to talk about this sort of thing. I have thought about it myself before. I've written about it in my therapy journal, but I've never thought about it this much. And so it was very nice to be able to talk about it and share my perspective. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. It was lovely seeing you as well, Malika. Looking at you.
Hey there! Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Raise the Brow. If you liked what you heard, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and YouTube for all future episodes.